I should begin by saying that this story I'm about to tell you is not for the faint of heart. Heck, I don't know if I'll ever recover from these events or the things that I saw that night, and I'm sure that I'll never be fully able to explain them. I was specifically asked never to speak a word about the incident, and was compensated fairly to do so. However, I'm telling this now because it was just over a year ago that this occurred, so I've been thinking a lot about it lately again and I can't sleep. Maybe talking about it will help and I just can't pretend like it never happened anymore. I need the world to know that there are sinister, unnatural beings in this world capable of things you couldn't possibly imagine. Let's begin with a bit of backstory. I'm a pretty young Midwestern guy, 25, and I've never really known what I wanted to do with my life. At first, I wanted to be an artist when I was a kid. Then, it was an architect, then a biologist, and then a movie director, and so on. For a while in college, I was waiting tables and Uber driving on the side while I was studying communications. I had no idea what I was planning to do with that, but I guess I was just waiting around until something clicked and I finally had a clue about what I wanted to do for a living. Uber driving was one of the best jobs I'd ever had, and it's what made me realize that I love to drive. Somewhere along the line, I realized that college wasn't for me, and as I had grown to love the road, I decided let's turn it into a career. I went to commercial driving school, got my CDL, and began working for a well-known trucking company. The one I worked for was a way for me to just get my experience. It was one of those larger companies where, as an employee, you sort of just feel like a number to the higher-ups. It wasn't bad, just not great. They gave me the loads, everything was pre-planned out, and they didn't pay much attention to me unless I called and asked for something. I worked as an over-the-road driver that was home every weekend, unless of course I got stuck somewhere waiting on a trailer, broke down, or there just wasn't enough time to make it home. Eventually, I felt pretty confident in what I was doing, and I rarely needed to call in my dispatcher unless there was a problem. At the time that this all happened, I had been driving for a little over a year, and now I don't think I'll ever be able to do it again. It was a Friday afternoon in September when I received a call from my dispatcher, let's just call him Steve, asking me if I would like to come back to work Sunday instead of Monday. They had a load that needed to be picked up just a few hours away from where I lived, and I was already on my way home for the weekend. I would still get Friday night and Saturday to relax, and I had never been one to shy away from a little extra cash, so I took him up on the offer. He told me that it was a live load, which means I had to bring an empty trailer with me, wait for some warehouse guys to load it, and I would be on my merry way. He said the load needed to be picked up at 8 p.m. and dropped off at 11. The whole trip would take me around 6 hours to complete. It was a little later in the day than normal, but not too bad for just an extra day of work. He finished by saying he would send me the details on Sunday, and thanked me for taking the initiative. Might I add, Steve didn't normally work on Sundays either, but that realization didn't hit me until later. By that time, I just brushed it off and figured he had picked up some extra hours too. The weekend was normal. Played a few video games, watched some TV, took a couple naps, the usual. Sunday around noon, I got an email with the details from Steve. The strange thing is, it was just 2 addresses. No pickup number, no trip number, no confirmation number, nothing. Just the 2 locations with our company logo at the bottom. Steve's electronic signature and contact information. I responded asking, "Where's the rest?" Almost immediately, I got the response. "That's it. They'll know what to do. Pick up from the first and drop off at the second." Something just didn't feel right, and at this point, I was regretting my decision. But what was there to do? I agreed to this, and it was my boss that asked me to do this, right? I left my apartment around 4:30 p.m., drove over to my truck, grabbed an empty trailer from the yard, and headed out. I put the address into my GPS and it appeared a bit off the beaten path. This wasn't totally unusual for me, but it usually meant getting there would be a pain in the butt. Making tight corners on small dirt roads with a 70-foot vehicle isn't easy. Turns out I was right. It was a pain in the butt to get there. I pulled up a few minutes early and I specifically remember it being almost pitch black when I arrived, with just a faint shine of blue light on the horizon. As I turned onto the property, my headlights illuminated the building, and let me tell you, this place was disgusting. It was unlike any place I'd ever seen before. If it wasn't for the few lit up windows and the outside lights turned on, but literally hanging from wires, I would have thought this factory was abandoned for years. It was about a 3-story, tan brick building absolutely covered in graffiti. There was a silo off to the right-hand side, and on the far left side of the building was a single bay door that was practically in shambles. Although from what I could see, there wasn't a single car or truck parked there to indicate that someone was inside. If something didn't feel right before, it certainly didn't now. Honestly, I wouldn't have gotten out of my truck, and thankfully, I didn't have to. Although Steve was working that day, he definitely wouldn't have been in now. He normally leaves work at around 5 o'clock, so if I ever had any issues after that time, I would just have to call the overnight dispatchers, and that's exactly what I was going to do. I just wanted to call someone to confirm that this was the right address. Just as I was about to hit call, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something approaching my truck. I put the bright screen down so I could see it, and it was a man, a fairly big man. I'd say about 300 pounds and not very well kept either. But to be fair, neither was I most days. I rolled down my window about halfway, probably seeming a little standoffish, but what psycho wouldn't be in this odd situation? "Are you the guy?" Yeah, I think." He chuckled. "Yes, you're our guy." Something about his demeanor was somewhat kind, a real gentle giant type, like he was just a regular guy, maybe even a grandfather to someone. But for some reason, that made me even more uncomfortable. Like it was some kind of face he put on to distract me from how obviously eerie this place was. Luckily, I think he could tell that I was a bit weirded out. No, don't worry. I opened the trailer doors for you, okay?" he added. I just nodded. "And then you back up into the door and we get you loaded in no time. I come out, you pull forward, I close doors for you, give you paperwork, okay?" "Okay, yeah," I replied. He gave me a thumbs up and headed to the back of the trailer. It wasn't until then that I noticed I wasn't breathing during that entire exchange. I released my chest and watched through my side mirrors as the big man opened my trailer doors. As he waddled back inside, he waved towards the locked door, and for a brief moment, I saw his silhouette looking through one of the broken windows. It appeared to be a dog, but a really freakish, rather large dog. Its head wasn't shaped right, and it looked to be mostly hairless. I only saw the top portion of its body, and I know that it sounds crazy, trust me, I know. Maybe it was just my uneasiness playing tricks on my mind. Yet, the only way I can describe it is, it looked like a werewolf, but like it was only transformed halfway. Though, just as quick as my eyes caught its gaze, it was gone. The next 30 minutes went by without much activity. I backed the trailer into the dock, pulled the brakes, and I sat in my driver's seat listening to music, but not really listening, waiting for the sign that I could get the heck out of there. After what felt like an eternity, the rhythmic bumps coming from the trailer stopped. Before long, the man barged out of the front door with papers in hand. I rolled down my window and watched as he walked up to my door. "Pull forward, okay?" He sounded a bit more serious this time around. "Oh yeah, okay." "Slowly, please," he stressed. "Sure thing, sir." I proceeded to release the brakes, put it in first, and pulled forward as slowly as I could. The last thing I wanted was to have the stuff fall out and have to wait here longer. When I pulled ahead far enough, he waved for me to stop, closed my trailer doors, and came back to my window. Here's your paperwork. You're all set, buddy. Thanks, I said as I looked over the documents. Now, there were several things wrong with this paperwork. For starters, the paper was slightly brown in color, as if they were sitting in this building for the last century. Secondly, normally I have to sign for the paperwork. And lastly, there was practically nothing on it. A few codes, the total weight, the product listing, but that was about it. In all honesty though, I couldn't give a crap right now, I just wanted to leave. You have a good night. As he said this, he gave me a smile. This one though was not the gentle giant type of smile. It was cold. It gave me goosebumps. I'll never forget that face. And then he turned his back and walked back into the building. Once I had composed myself, I pulled up my GPS again, put in the next stop, and made my way onto that dirt road, heading back towards the highway. I was glad to be out of there, but all of the things that I had just experienced were constantly racing through my head. Why was that place so run down? What was that dog? Where was I dropping this off? Would it be just as creepy? Luckily, this next place wasn't too far from its nearest town, so I could only hope. I probably made it about another hour and a half, and I was approximately 30 miles away from the drop when I suddenly heard my phone go off. I flipped it over and saw that it was a call from work. I thought, thank God, I needed to tell them about that place and maybe they would be able to blacklist the location so that no other drivers have to go there. So I picked up the phone.
Hey, I'm glad someone called. That place that I picked up from was... Wait.
He interrupted. I paused and waited for what he needed to say next. He continued.
This is Sean with Overnight Crew. Are you driving right now? My system shows that you are. Yeah, I picked up an extra load for tonight.
I replied.
Yeah, so I'm not seeing anything on my end. You don't have any assignments on you right now. Well, Steve called me on Friday and asked me if I would be willing to start my work week tonight instead of tomorrow. He said there was a load that needed to be picked up over in Iowa.
There was a moment of silence.
Let me see if I can get Steve on the phone. I'm gonna place you on hold. Okay.
The hold music began before I could finish. As I held my phone to my face and royalty-free music played in my ear, I looked in my rearview side mirror at the trailer. The glow of the red taillights ever so slightly lighting up the road behind me. What was going on? I knew something wasn't right, I knew it. I should have called in earlier to double check. After the Russian Jolly Green Giant came out to talk to me, I pulled the truck off to the side of the highway and turned on my hazards to wait for further instruction. The line clicked. The hold music stopped.
Hey, you still there?
Sean asked.
Yeah, I'm here. I was able to get a hold of Steve. He told me he didn't ask you to do anything tonight. Wait, what?
Well, that wasn't what I expected.
Are you sure it wasn't one of our other guys? No. I have an email from Steve and he called me on Friday and asked me to do this. Okay, well, you'll have to discuss that with him. Where are you right now?
At this point, Sean sounded a little bit irritated.
I'm on my way to the drop-off. Well, I don't have any clue where this information came from. I need you to go open. Steve, he sent me the details this afternoon from his work email.
Sean sighed.
Well, Steve has no recollection of this. He didn't work today, so he didn't send you the details. And we don't have any information on this load. Will you at least go open the doors and see what freight you have in there? Whatever it is, it isn't ours. He didn't work today. No. What is going on? I don't know. Will you just go check the trailer? Yeah, that's fine. I can do that. Hang on.
I grabbed my flashlight, checked the road, and slowly climbed out of my truck. As I approached the rear of the trailer, an odd but muted stench became apparent. It wasn't unbearable, it was just weird. Like lunch meat left out on a counter a bit too long.
Sean? Still here. It smells. Okay, well, what is it? I don't know yet.
I clicked on the light and pointed it at the doors as I came around the corner.
Let me put the phone down for a sec so I can get this open.
I set my phone on the lower rung of the trailer's frame and I looked up. Usually, the dock workers wrap a seal around the handles to prevent tampering, but oddly, there wasn't one. Odd was one way of putting a lot of things that happened so far that night, so at that point, I wasn't so surprised. I put the flashlight to my mouth and began releasing the hinges to the first door. The door just barely budged before the real stench hit me. My honest to God, I never smelled anything like it. Now, it was horrible. I winced and whipped my head away near the gagging. I stepped away from the door for a moment to fill my lungs with fresh air and I took a deep breath. I went back into it to unlatch the door the rest of the way. With my face turned to the side, I swung the door open. And as I did, I heard something hit the dirt. Still holding my breath, I panted my head over towards the ground, flashlight still in my mouth. The beam traveling across the ground met the object I assumed fell from the truck. It was a human leg, nearly disfigured and completely shredded. Almost immediately, as the light hit it, I jumped back, falling onto the ground, not even realizing I apparently had scraped the top layer of skin off my elbow. My heart galloped in my chest. My lungs tightened. I was mortified. I'm not even sure how long I sat there, but eventually I got back up to make sure that what I saw was real. And sure enough, the leg was there. I picked up the flashlight that had fallen out of my mouth and, with hands shaking, I shined the light into the trailer. It's hard to even talk about it now. I remember every detail of the few brief moments my eyes saw what laid inside. It was completely loaded with bodies, if you could even call them that. There wasn't much remaining though, like the bones left over after ordering a plate of wings. As I said, I only saw this for a second, but it was enough. Enough to know that they were human, that they were of varying ages based on the sizes of some of the skulls, and that they definitely weren't in their original form. At this point, the smell had completely coated the air around me, and it was then that I blew chunks. I shuffled back around the side of the truck only to be greeted with the sound of a car horn. An oncoming sedan that had just nearly missed me had haunted it past. It startled me, but in that moment, not as much as it should have. I was preoccupied with trying to get back into my truck. I then realized that I had left my phone in the back of the trailer, and I bolted back to grab it again, holding my breath. I picked it up, wiped my mouth clear of saliva and vomit, and began dialing 911. Before I could finish, a call came in from Steve's cell phone. I had completely forgotten that I was speaking to Sean before I opened the trailer. He must have hung up after not hearing from me for a while, and asked Steve to check in on the situation. I picked up the call as I got back to my driver door.
Steve, what is this? Whoa, Alec, I have no idea what you're talking about. What's going on? We spoke on Friday. The trailer it's in that place, the guy. You sent me an email today. Hey, take a deep breath. We never spoke Friday, and I never sent you any messages today. Are you okay?
I climbed back into my truck and sat for a moment in silence, trying to catch my breath.
Hello, Alec. I gotta go. Alec.
I hung up. I tried to control my shaking as I pulled up the dial pad on my phone. 911. I explained everything as best as possible. I gave them my current location, the address of the place that I picked up from, where it was going to be dropped, everything I could get out to remember. Within about 20 minutes, there were several cops, an ambulance, a fire truck, and a bit later, the FBI. Yeah, the FBI. I was questioned on the spot for a bit, but the adrenaline I had pumping through my veins 30 minutes ago had dissipated, and I actually don't remember much after the police arrived. I couldn't answer much. I was in shock. I was driven back to the city in a cruiser and basically spent the night at a precinct. It all felt like a dream. As I waited in a room, a few agents came in to ask more questions again, hoping this time they could get more out of me. With it having been a few hours later, I was able to get a hold of myself and give them the answers that they needed. Then they took me home and I sat on my couch until morning. Obviously, I wasn't working today. In fact, that was the last night that I ever worked for that company, and I never heard from Sean or Steve again. I know Steve was brought in question too, possibly Sean. I don't really know. I didn't do much that Monday. Tuesday, the FBI showed up at my apartment and wanted to come in and talk. They told me that I wouldn't see any of this on the news, that I wasn't to tell anyone about what had happened, and that I wouldn't be returning to work. What happened was classified and I would be receiving some money to pay for therapy, several years' salary and extra just for the hassle, and clearly to keep my mouth shut, but of course, they didn't phrase it like that. Obviously, I had a lot of questions about everything, but they could only give me a few answers. I asked them who did this, and they told me that they were not at liberty to discuss that. I asked them what that factory was, and I received the same reply. I asked if they caught the people who had put me up on this, the ones that had loaded my truck, but there was no response. One of the things they could tell me was that the messages I had received from my boss were from an outside party, whatever that means. They told me that a lot of those bodies were missing people. I asked if their families will ever get closure knowing what the answer was already. Unfortunately, no, they won't. After they left, I returned to just sitting around thinking about everything. At some point, I was able to distract myself with some YouTube videos, and as soon as I did, I passed out and almost slept for 18 hours. Eventually, life somewhat returned to normal. I did seek out the therapy that they recommended, and although it helped a lot, there are still many nights I lie awake wondering what happened or what I saw. After some time, I turned to the internet as one does with unanswered questions, and researched what it could have been that I saw that night. I don't think that they were werewolves. The mythology and physical abilities just don't match up. The closest thing that I could find is a creature called the Crocata. They eat human flesh and devour souls. They can mimic voices, shapeshift, and control electricity and technology. I guess that would explain the mysterious emails, the phone calls from Steve that weren't really Steve, the dog-like silhouette, and of course, the half-eaten bodies. The second address that I received, the drop-off, appeared to be some sort of old coal factory. Maybe the plan was to have these remains dropped off and incinerated by another group of the Crocotas. Therefore, leaving no trace behind, no evidence that these creatures exist. Maybe I'm looking too far into it. Perhaps you guys can figure it out. I didn't normally believe in mythical monsters, but I honestly don't know what to believe anymore. Currently, I'm a dishwasher at a local bar and grill, and surprisingly, I enjoy it. I keep to myself mostly listening to music, and when the kitchen or waitstaff messes up an order, my dinners are free. It's a little slower right now with this pandemic, so it's not much, but it's honest work, as they say. It's relatively stress-free, and I don't ever have to visit shady locations. I try to avoid driving at night, and I'm now afraid of dirt roads. They just bring back too many memories. I know none of this was supposed to be said, but maybe by talking about it, I can sleep at night knowing that someone might have the answer or the closure that they need. People need to know that there are monsters out there, human and inhuman. And for God's sake, if you ever run into a situation that just doesn't feel right and makes your stomach turn, please, just leave.